Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Amy and the Sun Valley Forum, for having me here. I'm very excited to tell you some stories, not of me so much, but of us in this century that we're in, which is the one that makes or breaks it, right? You know, we are the generation that has to fix generation of electricity, or else we have this. This has been the backstory of our lives. We've just heard a whole lot about carbon and carbon markets. And obviously, you know, since I was born in 1971, this has been a doom script that's been building until the last decade or so, when we've just bent the curve on that carbon buildup in the atmosphere because of the way we are transforming the world's energy supply, which is really what I want to flip the script to. Stop talking about carbon and start talking about energy production and demand and use and how we get it. You know, we used to get it by burning stuff to cook, to light the cave, to warm ourselves. Now we put fire in a wire for most of us here in the form of electricity. And that's been this amazing thing in my lifetime that's more than tripled. On the right of your screen, you see the growth in energy provision. On the other side, you see how big the renewables energy share has become. But I want to keep that tension in your minds as we go through this narrative, because the demand growth along with the amount of renewables is the race of our times. Just a little bit about me as a sort of an actor in this play, this protagonism. I've been an activist since I met Amy in Rio in 1992, like Gia's parents at the Earth Summit. Wonderful romantic thing, not that Amy and I were romantically engaged. And then went on to sort of lots of ratbaggery with Greenpeace and other things. Actually, in 2000, I worked with Pam Wellner on a campaign to bring a $100 million bond to bear in San Francisco to build the first $100 million worth of solar and wind in San Francisco, including the first megawatt in America on the Moscone Center. I went on to start a bunch of solar companies in the States and in Fiji and Kenya and the Philippines, and then took on the California Clean Energy Fund, which gives me the privilege as a day job of managing investments for the state into startups and entrepreneurs, with which we've also built New Energy Nexus, which is a replicant ecosystem builder in a dozen other countries beyond California to support startups, like It's Electric, who came up through one of our programs, the winner of the Keeling Curve Prize the other night. So at Nexus, we've done this in large volumes. We've touched over 1 million aspiring entrepreneurs with our engagement. We've trained 10,000 of them through our accelerators and incubator programs. We've invested in over 1,200 of them. These figures are a little bit out of date because this is last year's impact report. But it's been a remarkable journey meeting the heroes and sheroes that are making that curve bend by deploying solar, wind, and batteries. And that's the story that I really want to get you excited about. But just to return to the key point, it's that energy demand has been growing through our lives, and you got to keep your eyes on the prize. as the Prez said, the prize is in Asia. That is where energy demand growth has grown this century and will continue to grow. We know the story of China. We sort of think we know India, Indonesia, Vietnam, the Philippines, Thailand, Pakistan, Bangladesh. These countries are driving it, and Africa hasn't even started yet. Of the billion people in the 54 countries on that continent, 600 million haven't even benefited from electricity yet. So if you want to get after emissions, you got to get after where energy demand growth is. You got to go to Asia and Africa. As I said, we've tripled energy or electricity demand globally in my lifetime, and a third of that is now met by renewables. That is the gift of the century so far. We have to, however, not only grow renewables to maintain pace with the growth in demand, but also actually replace the existing base of production and how we meet demand. So it's sort of a tricky concept for a lot of people, but we're only just peaking now. It was said a couple of days ago on this stage, but we're on a plateau. We aren't actually declining the production and growth in emissions of the coal, oil, and gas. However, just last year, a breakthrough happened, which is that we started to catch up with the trailing rate of demand growth. So we are now in a position in the world where we produce enough of the widgets, the mousetraps, the photovoltaics, the batteries, and the wind turbines in particular, to keep up with the trailing demand over 10 years, which is a very exciting moment. The key to this story is the solar breakout. You know, in that last slide, you would have seen the yellow block, which is solar. And solar is doing this astounding technological adoption curve, which is unlike anything in history, unlike even cell phones, according to Amory Lovins, a faster S-curve of adoption from 0 to 100% of its market share, doubling every 2 to 3 years, which means that we're producing an amazing amount of productive capacity in the world. And this year, no change. The acceleration is continuing. Actually, as of June, we put in as much photovoltaics so far this year as we had done in 2022, just 2 years ago. We're really in a moment in history this summer that is hard to imagine, which will go down in the history books. In fact, The Economist, if you might have noticed, did a special edition last month called The Age of the Rise of Solar. It described it as a much more important technological phenomenon than AI and the internet and all the things that we hype these days, because we are literally rewiring the world so we can electrify everything straight to the source, the big burning fusion plant in the sky, as we speak and sit here. This is a faster breakout of any technology in the history of the world. And what's really cool about that is the spillover dynamic, as the economists call it. You've already seen this in your driving habits. We are taking this low-cost, abundant electricity, which gets cheaper the more you use it, and putting it in our cars and in our buses, and more importantly, in our 2- and 3-wheel vehicle formats in Asia and Africa, where that's how people move around. 85% of vehicle miles traveled in India are on rickshaws. Guess what? Rickshaws and motorbikes in Asia have taken 1 million barrels a day of demand out of the oil industry's pocketbook, literally through its electrification. That's going to come to buildings as we cool them and heat them with electric appliances, as we use induction stoves and all the things we're going to electrify in our homes. And then to industry, these so-called hard to abate sectors are increasingly getting easier to abate. Steel, for example, is increasingly being done with electric arc furnaces. In fact, in China, which is 70% of the world's steelmaking, they haven't invested this year yet in any thermal combustion steelmaking or iron ore production capital. They've done all electric arc furnaces buying because part of the 14th five-year plan is to shift to scrap and recycled steelmaking, which is actually happening as we speak. So there's a whole lot of work to get this done. I don't want to be too bullish, and don't pretend that what we agreed in Dubai in December is not a big lift. We said we would triple the rate of throughput of these things by 2030. So in the next 6 years, we're going to do 3 times as much as we did last year every year of solar, wind, and battery deployments on Earth, according to the agreement. And that's the only recipe we have with known technologies we have that will solve this. Again, to just put it bluntly, solar's sort of on track, according to Bloomberg, which is one of the better forecasters in the space, but we still have a big lift to get to where we need to be tripling renewables in that timeline. Some more good news for you, though. I've heard it said here that the money's not available. I don't actually agree with that statement. I think the world is awash in cash. There's 100 trillion GDP global economy. We spend 7 trillion, as Gia pointed out, per annum on subsidizing fossil fuels, still $11 million a minute, as she put it. We could convert that to the need for $8 or $9 trillion total to do this renewable build out. In fact, the big end of town has already started to do this since 2016. More money's gone to that side of the ledger than to the dirty side of the ledger. And this year, again, to just stress what a breakout moment you are in history, solar is attracting more capital than all other forms of energy technology combined. Upstream oil and gas peakers, coal plants, wind farms, whatever. Solar is getting more capital invested than any of it. And this is largely being driven by China, who are our friend in this story. And we often cast them as the bad guy for reasons which we might want to check, because they are doing this thing at speed and scale unlike any other, including the electrification of everything. One of the measures here is not just how much renewables they're building and how dominant they are in the supply chains of the solar, the wind, and the batteries, and the EVs, and all the things, but how their end use of energy is going electric. As I mentioned, steel production last month was up 3%. Emissions from steel in China was down 3%. Cement production emissions were down 11%. The economy is still growing in China. They are decoupling. President Xi's commitment to install 1,200 gigawatts of wind and solar this decade by 2030 will be met this year in China, 6 years early. So they're doing it. it's hard to understand how much they're doing it, but like in the month of May, they produced more electricity from photovoltaics than Australia produced electricity last year. Of course, they have to do a mountain of work because they've got a mountain of electricity to displace because they brought 500 million humans into middle-class urban lifestyles from rural poverty over the turn of the century, and they made all the things for all of us. This is like Germany, the green line at the bottom. Their clean energy production is double what Germany produces in electricity annually. They still have a lot of work to do, no doubt, but they are certainly intent on doing it. And as our friends over the mountain in Aspen at Rocky Mountain Institute say, they are driving the sixth wave of the Industrial Revolution. The techno-economic paradigm of our time is being shifted. The United States is schizophrenically, I would say, trying to be a good actor and keep up with this. They are doing their best here in the States. 81% of all the things that we add to our grid this year will be solar and batteries. 81%. Pareto principle says just stick with it because it's working. If you look at this graph, you can see that we're actually keeping up with demand and we're eating into that production of dirty energy base that we need to get rid of. We have just crested in the last quarter 200 gigawatts installed. Well done, congratulations. And then a little humility to recognize that China did 200 gigawatts last year. This is cumulative in the history of America since we invented the technology in 1954. So we can do more. But we are confused and schizophrenic, as I said, because this century, our industrial strategy and innovation policy has largely been geared to fracking and becoming the largest oil producer and gas exporter in the history of the world. We are now the largest investor in dirty energy in North America, whereas someone else, who, as I said, often get cast as villains, are the largest investor in clean energy. It's a nuanced story, however. If I were Cat Taylor, I would be singing the Body Electric to you and acknowledging that we are wide and full of contradictions. And the perfect union in the United States is no different, with California leading the charge as a sort of nation state. I'm very proud to have been part of this. Since that $100 million we got in 2000, we've gone to 30% across the calendar year, all renewables. And on some days, in fact, 100 days so far this calendar year, we've been 100% solar and wind powered in the Golden State of California, the fifth largest economy in the world. Many of those days we've been 120 or 130% solar and wind powered, which has meant we have had to bring batteries on 10, 11 gigawatts of capacity, which is a remarkable story of shimmying and shaping and storing that energy so we can flatten the curves to allow the grid to operate smoothly. I will acknowledge that our friends in Texas have done a hell of a lot too, giving California a good run for the money with a very different model, a competitive electricity market rather than the regulated monopolies of California. And they're giving it their best shot, notwithstanding the challenges they faced with climate vulnerability and Hurricane Beryl last week. But they're going to beat us shortly in Texas. So what then am I worried about? Can we all go home now? Is it all going to be solved? Is it all good? No, mainly because remember what I said about keeping your eyes on the prize. We are not spending the effort and the time and the mind share and the money where we need to. This is directionally correct. The numbers may be wrong. It's from one of those consultancies. But because of demographics, because we are electrifying everything, because electric motors are more efficient, because we're going to renewables, China, North America, Europe will decline in energy demand over coming decades. The growth in energy demand and therefore the potential for emissions is coming out of Southeast Asia, 720 million people, India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, etc., and then the continent, so-called sub-Saharan Africa. We have to work there, and yet the flow of funds is crashing. $1 in $3 today is being invested in the United States. That's the height in history. It was at a height pre-COVID of 18%. It's now 33%. And you can bet your bottom dollar a lot of that is going to oil and gas. So we got to get some money going into this part of the world. It's actually why I'm leaving my day job as Nexus CEO and going to spend time with a venture fund we've set up in Singapore to serve the VIP countries, Vietnam, Indonesia, and the Philippines, and their entrepreneurs. There's other reasons you might think this story is not as good as I've made it out. This story of us is not going to be so good because batteries are bad, right? Isn't mining going to be just as awful? Well, first, let's check it. The fossil fuel footprint is enormous, whereas if we go to a circularized economy, which we can do with batteries, we can actually end extraction in our lifetimes. Maybe there'll be a little bit of leakage, but we won't need to go back to the well because batteries are 100% recyclable. Just to compare, every year we dig this much volume of coal, oil, and gas out of the ground annually. compared to the Burj Khalifa. That's it in tonnage. And then the little blue circles below are what we would need to do all the things I'm talking about, all the steel, all the aluminium, all the lithium, cobalt, all the metals, all the silicon for all the photovoltaics, all that in 2050, if we don't recycle it, would be de minimis against the volume of things we take out of the Earth's crust annually. To put it another way, if you are an individual consumer, which you are in Australia, which you are not, but you have a very similar lifestyle, you'd burn about 5,000 kilograms of stuff to create about 15,000 kilograms of stuff, because that's what we do, layering the atmosphere with carbon dioxide, have a bit of a waste stream. Call it 22,000 kilograms of stuff to run your world on electricity. With renewables, you need about 250 kilograms of stuff to have the same lifestyle. If you recycled 75% of that, which is entirely technologically and economically feasible today, you would have less than 100 kilogram footprint per capita. Another thing you might have heard, we should wait for the Hail Mary. Nukes is going to come and save us. Well, the only country really trying nukes seriously is China, which is building 26 of them. All those 26 plants would produce about 200,000 terawatt hours of electricity in their rated capacity and lifetime. The amount of PV and wind that they installed in the first 9 months of last year produces that much electricity. In the subsequent 9 months, they put in more. In the next 9 months, they will put in more. So if the time value of carbon is important to you, which I think it is, as we've discussed, we need to do the things that work in the time required. And the only tool we have that scales at the speed required are photovoltaics. I got ChatGPT to do this for me. It's a graph that shows how quickly you can install a gigawatt of PV. Back in 2004, it took a year. Today, it takes less than a day. Next year, it will take a few hours. And in 5 years, it'll take an hour. That is the solution we have at hand and the one we need to put to work. Don't worry about demand from data centers. It's relatively small. It's a couple of percentage points on the 30,000 terawatt hours of electricity consumption we have per annum, which is growing at 3% per annum. Don't worry about waste, because we're going to solve for that too with recycling, and it's much smaller than the coal ash and the crap and the plastics that we create from oil. So we will win this. The story has a happy ending. To recap, it's because we are the lowest cost provider of the thing called electricity ever in the history of the world already today, and it's getting cheaper. We are better, faster and cheaper, as some clever people say. It is a fact that we can be localized, decentralized in ownership, democratized in control. The incumbents are asleep at the wheel. They're having their Kodak moment as we speak. They are not seeing this, and I worry that in our politics in this country, we will miss the shot as well. But the good news is we can get back to the Paris baseline. We can actually bend that curve further with EVs, wind, solar alone, and we can come back to 1.5 to stay alive. And we will create a lot of jobs, which may be the panacea for our politics and our fractured country, because the way we cure for economic needs is creating jobs, 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 as well as lower cost for consumers. That's what we do in spades with this stuff. Nick Stern wrote a whole study of all the existential reasons why this is better. The last of them is this bottom line that I'll refer to because it is what this Sun Valley Forum has been all about. It is 100 times less impact to run our lives with renewables, which we can do today with known technology at a cost which makes us money through our investment, and it has 100 times lower impact on nature. So I want to thank you all for listening to me rave about this story of us, and thank Sun Valley Forum for bringing us all together to talk about how to bring more harmony with nature. If you want to hear me ramble some more, I did a 12-part podcast series with Kate Blanchett called Climate or Change. Check it out. Thank you very much. Shine on.